Well, it is so good to see you. Thank
It's so
you
good to see you
for
too.
connecting with me today.
Oh my gosh, of course. Thank you for being so flexible with the holiday rescheduling.
Absolutely. Well, and you didn't just have the holidays, you had a move in there too,
I
didn't you?
had a move, I had the holidays, and then I ended up getting sick as well. So it was just
Oh,
a very big 3 weeks.
oh my goodness. That's
Yeah,
like the perfect storm of
it is.
chaos, anxiety.
Totally. Chaos is a great word for it. And it was, yeah, I'm glad to be on the other side. New year, settled well.
Right.
But it was a little crazy there for a few weeks.
I understand. Well,
Yeah,
I have been looking forward to our conversation for weeks.
me
I
too.
have been, I don't know that obsessed is the right word, but I've been interested in Enneagram for a
Yeah.
while.
Well, I feel like Enneagram always just comes with an obsession. I was the exact same way when I was getting into it. It's just so fascinating when you're learning.
It is. I read the
Mhm.
book, The Road Back to You. Have you read that?
Yep.
And
Ian
that's
Cron, and
okay.
yeah, so good.
And that's how it came across my periphery, or how I first became aware of it. So
Mhm.
after reading that, I kind of diagnosed myself. I
Yeah.
guess assigned myself a number,
Yeah.
and then everyone in my family, of course, because I had to know.
Mhm.
And my
Everyone's.
yes, and my
Mhm.
family obliged, so that was sweet.
I love
But
that.
I found you actually just by with a Google search.
I love
I
it.
was like, it would be so fun to talk with someone about Enneagram and business, or
Mhm.
Enneagram and entrepreneurship. And
Mhm.
sure enough, I came across your website called enneagramforentrepreneurs.com,
Mhm.
which is perfect. You got
Thank
found.
you.
You got found.
I love SEO actually working in real time.
Right?
I love that.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Well, and that's my background as well, is that
Mhm.
I've had a marketing strategy agency since 2015. And
Mhm.
I think I explained a little bit when we talked before that I started down a path to be more focused on a specific industry, which has landed
Mhm.
me here. So it's been a ton of fun diving into the world of professional organization.
Mm.
And so that's what the name of this podcast is now, is professional organizing, or
Mm.
sorry, I'll edit this part out.
Okay.
Marketing made simple, pro organizing marketing made simple.
I love that.
So when we talked previously,
Mhm.
we had talked about how the Enneagram can explain clutter styles, but also
Mhm.
how you can use it to communicate with clients, also
Mhm.
knowing yourself, understanding them. So tell me a little
Mhm.
bit about how you got into this, but then also how
Yeah.
you've applied this for entrepreneurs and small business
Yeah.
owners.
Absolutely. So, as I'm sure you've seen, just getting into the world of Enneagram, there are endless applications for this personality tool. It's such an incredible assessment of just kind of where you are on your growth journey. I think one of the things I love the most about it is it really doesn't box you into your type. It shows you how to really integrate with all of the other types. But one, or really several of the most, I would say, transformative applications of the Enneagram in the world of small business is understanding how you handle stress, understanding your communication style, and understanding your ideal work environment.
Yes.
So the three of those are really areas that I've seen generate the most interest when it comes to personality styles
Could
within
you
the
could you
Enneagram.
repeat those?
Oh,
The
yeah,
three?
absolutely. So the first is understanding how you handle stress.
Yes.
The second is your communication style. And then the third is your ideal work environment.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
That's so
So,
interesting.
yeah. And I think that those are really starting points. I mean, when I'm introducing anyone to Enneagram, I always say it's helpful to first find your type. And it's really not a diagnosis. So you did do it the correct way, and that you really are finding your type for yourself and self diagnosing and sitting with it and noticing your behavior. And I like to kind of spend a little bit of time helping someone correctly identify which type they are.
Yeah.
And then start to integrate your growth path, which has 2 numbers, your wings, which are 2 different numbers. You've got
Yes.
subtypes. I mean, there's like so many different things to get into, but it really starts with the individual getting to a healthy point and then really understanding the community and world around them. And one of the most helpful things in understanding the Enneagram too is just that we're all experiencing the world a little bit differently. And so
Sure.
it generates a ton of empathy and just understanding and problem solving, and one person's strengths are another person's weaknesses. There's no bad type. There's no like best number.
Right.
They're all have equal strengths and weaknesses. Everyone always thinks that they're the worst one, but I think that we all just feel so seen whenever the number presents itself. I remember when I first read about the type 3, I was like mortified. It's like no one can ever know. This is so embarrassing. But I think
Uh-huh.
everyone feels that way when they're presented with something that just so accurately shines a light, especially on things that you think you have so successfully hidden.
Right. Well, and one thing with the Enneagram and kind of why specifically with this assessment that comes up is that it talks about your underlying fear, your
Yeah.
underlying motivator, but that underlying fear.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so for a 3, I'm a 3.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you read that, like I'm reading these nice things and I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's me, definitely me.
Yeah.
Like I'm
Yeah.
reading down through the things. And then it says underlying fear, worthlessness. And I'm like,
Oh,
I didn't want anyone to know that.
totally. Totally. And the biggest thing with the 3 is like covered up.
Totally, because we're image
So yeah,
conscious,
totally.
right? So it's almost the worst
Absolutely.
thing.
Oh, and it was so funny because I remember when I was first figuring out my type, I had been kind of sitting with a 3 for a while because I wasn't sure if I was a 3 or a 7. A lot of
Uh-huh.
times they're both assertive numbers. They like 3s, 7s, and 8s can all kind of like misidentify. But I was sitting with my mom and aunts and cousins. We'd done a girls' trip to all talk about the Enneagram together and like figure out each other's numbers, which is so fun.
Super
Um,
fun.
but I remember sitting and being like, I think I'm a 3. I'm just not entirely sure. And mom's like, read it. She goes, oh, 100%. She goes, I have proof. So she goes and gets like a childhood photo album, opens it up, and there's this picture of me from the 5th grade talent show. And I'm just in the center of a stage with my hands up. There's a spotlight coming down on me, and I just like am glowing. And she was like, this is a 3. That's like you're
Wow.
spot on. I was loving the limelight.
Okay, so are you a 3 wing too then?
I go back and forth. I
Okay.
really feel like I've integrated wings at different points. I
Yeah.
think in this season of my life, my 4 is probably a little bit more integrated than my 2.
Okay.
But 2 years ago, I would have said the 2 wing was a little bit stronger. So I really go between the 2 pretty
Yeah. Well, and the
frequently.
the reason I ask is
Yeah.
because again, I'm a 3, but I'm more of a
Mhm.
wing 4. But
Mhm.
I don't necessarily seek out a limelight. Like I'm always
Yeah.
creating things and I'm always working towards my next goal, but
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily a performer. I don't necessarily want to be
Yes.
on stage. I just want to do well whatever I'm
Yes.
doing. But my dad, we both did the Enneagram, and
Uh-huh.
so I was telling him about it, and he came up as a 3 wing too,
Mhm.
and he's very much kind of center stage.
Yeah.
Had a television show, and like was his
Yeah.
happiest. Like he just lights up when
Yeah.
he is in that kind of capacity. So it was a
Mhm.
little bit different. So I was just
Mhm.
wondering, I was curious if that kind of center stage
Yeah.
limelight was more the 3 wing 2 thing.
I don't know if it's related to the wings or the subtype. I also think I go through seasons of being more withdrawn and a little bit more like creative goal oriented, and then
Yeah.
seasons of like throwing on the charm and wanting to be like center stage. So I go so back and forth. But that's funny that you mentioned that. There are a huge common misconception with 3s is that they always want to be performing. And that is definitely, we have some introverted 3s for sure. Yeah.
Yes, and you probably can't tell
Yeah.
because when I'm in front of people, I am very much, like I can interact with people,
Yeah. You
but
turn it on.
right, I turn it on, but my energy, like I
Yeah.
have to have alone time to
Yeah.
rebuild my energy.
Mm.
for sure.
Absolutely. I love that. One of my favorite things is really to talk to people like with all within the same type and kind of see some of the differences because it's a similar world view, but it presents in different behavior. So
Yes.
it's really, and that's one thing I love about it as opposed to like Myers-Briggs or some of the other personality assessments that are really based on behavior. The Enneagram is based on motivation. So the
Yes.
behavior can look so different, but you'll see that like the underlying motivation is like the exact same current, which is
Right.
really cool.
One of my closest friends is also a 3, and she and I had very similar upbringings as far as
Mm,
being raised kind of in an agriculture setting,
yeah,
southwestern Kansas.
yeah.
Just a lot of the same types of people were in our lives and
Mm,
influenced us, and so it's very interesting to see how some of those things play out. But it's funny that when
yeah,
she and I are talking, like we don't really have to explain things
yeah,
to each other because we get it and we
yeah,
know we
totally.
know how they arrived or how she arrived
Yeah,
at that specific thing.
yeah.
So
That's,
if we were to back up and just be like, wait, maybe our listeners haven't ever heard of the Enneagram. How would
yeah,
you, for if someone was in front of you saying, "What's the Enneagram? I've never heard
yeah.
of it." How would you explain it?
So it has kind of a complicated, not the most clear history. But basically it's the idea that it's based on our ego, like identifying kind of some, there's even debate on whether or not you're born with it or it develops over time.
Okay.
So there's a lot of disagreement within the Enneagram community. So I would say the thing that's most widely accepted is that at some point in childhood, you learned a truth or your ego learned a truth, and the rest of your life, your personality was built on protecting that worldview. So,
Okay.
like for instance, for a 3, it was kind of like I need to perform in order like to be loved. And so
Mhm.
you're really protecting this image, and your personality forms around protecting an ego that believes that to be true. And you spend most of your adult life kind of either staying in that place and not doing the work, in which you see a lot of like unhealthy behaviors. And that's when you start to see more of like psychosis or personality disorders,
Mhm.
or doing the work to heal some of that past emotional trauma in which you integrate and move beyond the limitations of like your childhood survival mode. So there's 9 Enneagram types. A lot of people, because the numbers can be assigned values just based on how we use numeric numbers. So 1 is not better or worse than 9. It's just a way of
Sure.
differentiating.
Yep.
Um, and all of them have had different titles associated to them with different teachers. Some of the more common ones, the type 1 perfectionist, really sees the world as black and white, right or wrong. There's a moral compass, there's a right way to do things, and they're really avoiding doing the wrong thing or making a mistake. A type 2 is the helper. So they're really the more empathetic of the ego types. They're always looking to help and really feel that in order to be loved, they need to be needed. So they kind of create opportunities to be needed by others. Like, and also just like that's how they show love. Like love is needing me for, I need to serve a purpose.
Yeah.
A type 3 is sometimes called the performer, the achiever, but they're very much building an image of I have to meet the expectations of others in order to be loved. Like there's really no room for me to fail, or to catch people off guard. Like I really need to like live up to the expectations, impress, like garner admiration, and then people will love me.
Mhm.
The type 4 has historically been called the artist, but not every type 4 is artistically inclined. So I like to say individualist.
Yes, I've heard that
Yeah.
descriptor too. Yeah.
Yeah. So they really are seeing like, I need to have self expression. And I think their focus is really on self love. A lot of their work is on integrating kind of self worth and finding it within instead of through others. So a lot of times you'll see an individualist like looking for a savior and a best friend and a partner and a business partner. Like they really are looking for people to fix them for the most part. because they feel like there's something broken inside. And a lot of their work is realizing that they're already whole.
Okay.
A type 5 is the observer. So they live within their head, and they're also kind of in survival mode where it's, I need as much information and data as possible in order to survive. So they're kind of like the Boy Scouts of the Enneagram in my head, like the always be prepared. They have so much energy and so much resource, and they're very careful with who they have in their lives, their emotional energy, where they're putting their time, and love solo time. They are definitely like the most obvious introverts.
Okay.
And then type 6, they're the loyalists. And I love type 6 because I know so many of them, and they're always identified by very high levels of anxiety. So it's kind of this idea of like, I need to have my support group. It's kind of like the Chicken Little of the Enneagram, where like the sky is always falling.
Yes, I have read
and
that.
they think through, every last worst case scenario in order to not be caught off guard.
Yep.
But on the other hand, type 6, always, they're hilarious. They have a great sense of humor, incredible friends, very collaborative, very team focused. And type 7 is the enthusiast. So they don't want to be tied down. They're always looking for like the next stimulation. Their mind is going 100 miles an hour faster than anyone else. Really quick thinkers. What's so funny is most type 7s are seen as really scattered, but it's not that they're scattered. It's that their mind's going so fast that they can't usually verbally keep up with how the pace that their mind is going.
Right.
So their verbal communication can feel like really disjointed. But it actually makes sense if you like go through it with them.
Yeah.
They're just on a different pace.
Right. My husband is a 7, and I actually had Molly Mahar from Stratajoy on the show a while back. And she is also a 3 married to a 7. So I thought that was really interesting. And the friend I was mentioning earlier that, she and I are very similar. She's a 3. She's also a 3 married to a 7. So I don't know if you're married or you are in a relationship.
I'm not, but I feel like
maybe you'll find a 7.
Oh yeah. I mean, a 7 would be such a dream. I've dated 4s and 5s, and I need to just keep making my way around the wheel.
Yes.
I love that.
7s are fun.
7s are a lot of fun. I have several friends who are 7s.
Yeah.
A type 8, they're known as the challenger. So they are the ones that you'll see a huge common thread that a lot of 8s have endured really severe childhood trauma where they did not have a protective figure. So they've experienced some level of vulnerability as children and have created a wall of like, I can fight the world on my own. But you'll see a lot of 7s are really aggressive, direct, assertive types who have a very soft center. So I also have so many friends who are 8s, but they are very much, they parent themselves. Like they seem very capable, in control, on top of it, leader, but they definitely are needing to learn how to nurture the child within and kind of integrate that softness without feeling scared of vulnerability. And then the type 9, the peacemaker, they are the ones that most easily identify with every type on the Enneagram because they have a very unique ability to truly put themselves in the shoes of every other type and see their point of view. They're the natural mediators, very conflict averse.
Okay. Isn't harmony? Harmony is a word associated with that one.
Huge harmony. Yeah.
Okay.
They can be a little bit more low energy in the fact that they are like quiet, still, calm, peace. So like no disruptors. So that's kind of a loose overview of all of them. There's a couple of exercises that are helpful in identifying your type because there's so much more that goes into it. Like when you first hear it, you're like, there's like 4 or 5 I could easily identify as.
Definitely.
I actually have a free ebook that really walks through the whole process of finding your type. So it's just enneagramforentrepreneurs.com/find your type.
Okay.
So that'll make it really easy. There's like journaling prompts, questions to ask friends and family, tests that I would recommend as a starting point to kind of start that journey. And then once you find your type, like that's when the fun begins, because you can kind of start to get a little bit deeper.
Right. Because for me, I remember the path of being kind of, and we hit on this a little
Yeah.
while ago, understanding me, and just kind of all of these light bulbs went on for me. Like,
Yeah.
okay, that's why I do that. Or that's why I
Yeah.
always feel like, if I'm not moving towards achieving a goal, I just feel like nothing is happening and everything is
Yes.
terrible.
Yeah.
Nobody else
Totally.
is thinking of that of me,
Yeah.
but that's what I
Yeah.
think of myself.
Completely.
And
Yeah.
then kind of once I wrapped my head around understanding myself, then and then even having conversations and kind of encouraging my husband and my
Yeah.
friends and my family to also take this assessment, understanding, like hearing their number and being like, okay, it helped me understand more of, for
Yeah.
instance, like my husband, because he's kind of a dichotomy. He's a
Yeah.
7 wing 8. So but he's also a perfectionist. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
only in certain
Yeah.
areas. So
Totally.
people are confusing because people are
Yeah.
complex, and then
Yeah.
relationships are complex and how you interact. So for me, being able to kind of read the descriptions and understand, like, okay, well, that is him being a 7.
Yeah. Totally.
Or with another friend, like, okay, she's a 2, she's a helper, she wants to serve. It helped me understand where they were coming from more
Yes.
easily.
Totally.
And so I could see
Yeah.
how in business, first knowing about yourself,
Yeah.
and then kind of having that understanding of how you can work with people, knowing
Yeah.
that information could be really helpful.
It
But
is.
how do you do that with clients? Do you say, like, as part of your intake, like, what's your Enneagram? Like, how do you open
Yeah.
that conversation as a small business owner?
So in some ways it's hard, because I think for me, sometimes when I'm asking someone like, what's your Enneagram? I kind of feel like I'm asking like, so what's your trauma? Like, what are you most afraid of?
What is your worst
Yeah.
fear?
Yeah.
Bare your
And it
soul to
does,
me.
it feels like it can get really invasive really fast. And I
Yeah.
think that there is a level of my 3 that comes out in that, and that I don't like things getting overly personal when there isn't a safety net or like a safe space created first.
Yeah.
And that's like a very 3 thing, that they keep things like pretty shallow until you've earned the depths. So I've struggled, and that sometimes I'll have clients even tell me their Enneagram, and I was like, whoa, I haven't asked for that yet. Like, we're not there.
Hold your horses.
Yeah.
I don't know you that well.
Yeah, exactly. But I think for me, there are little cues for things you can ask. So
Okay.
what's great is, especially when you're working with the client one-on-one, and especially when you're doing something that's service-based, or like for me, I do branding as part of my design studio. So doing personal branding, there are some questions that can lead into more of like a filtering system.
Okay.
From like, oh, like, why are you starting your business? Like, how do you work best? Like, what is, what do you feel like your purpose in life is? And you can start to kind of put the threads together. So say you're, reorganizing someone's space, and you're asking like, what does a morning routine look like for you?
Yep.
Or like, walk me through how you clean the kitchen, or something like that. So you can start to see their thought process of like, this thought is informing this behavior. And then you can start to put the puzzle pieces together.
Yep.
And I would say, to start, the easiest thing to think about is like, what kind of energy is someone bringing to the table? So is their energy like really confident and assertive and bold and like sure of themselves? Then that's a big piece of information to kind of put away, as far as they would call that like the assertion triads. That's usually like a 3, a 7, or an 8.
Okay.
If it's more withdrawn, like you're kind of having to pull information out of them, they're like a little more shy or hesitant. Like, I think my mom's a 9, and anytime I ask her anything, she's like, well, like maybe this, but I could be wrong. It could be something completely different. And I was
The
like, no, I mean, if that's what
anti-conflict.
it is, yeah, I was like, that's what it is, just say it.
Right. So
I'm
there
not
are
gonna argue with
clues.
you. Yeah,
Right.
so
So you can ask
yeah.
questions. There are clues that you can kind of lead
Mhm.
up to. So
Yeah.
as a professional organizer, kind of going in and
Yeah.
doing the consultation, you can
Mhm.
ask these
Mhm.
questions to kind of give you an idea of
Yeah.
that number, because these are the
Mhm.
questions that are being asked, because you have to know their systems, you have to know their
Yep.
routines. You kind of have to know the
Mhm.
flow of their lives and their homes in
Yeah,
order to put those correct systems in place that will serve them.
totally. Yeah, and I mean, even asking questions like, why do you think you've struggled with this up until now? I mean,
Yeah.
that's you're going to get so much insight into their personality and their worldview that way too. Maybe they're saying like, I just haven't been told what to do yet, or this was never shown to me, or XYZ, that you can kind of use that as helpful information. And for me, I kind of like, I mean, I'm obviously in the Enneagram world a lot more than maybe your average person is on a
Sure.
day-to-day basis, but even refreshing kind of how each of the types are, you'll start to kind of think through like, oh, I think this client might be this one just because of a few behaviors I've seen. And even if you get it wrong, it's not like, it's going to be a crisis. You adjusting your personality to suit how someone else is responding is in and of itself part of how we learn how to be in relationship.
Right.
As I've also had clients who are completely mistyped, who are like, oh, I'm definitely, a two. And I'm like, from everything I've ever learned and working with you, that could not be further from the truth. But
Yeah.
it's not my job to tell you that. I just have to know, like, okay, that's how you view yourself. And I'm probably going to still play to which one I think is probably more accurate.
Yeah. And one of the things that you were saying too at the
Mhm.
beginning of our conversation was understanding how you handle stress. So a lot of
Yes.
times when clients are calling a professional organizer,
Mhm.
they are stressed because
Yeah.
things aren't functioning, because things are
Yeah.
chaotic. And so really being able to understand Enneagram types can also help you figure out what's stressing your clients and to
Yes.
remove that stress.
Exactly. So I think I would say one of the more telling signs of someone's type is how they're behaving when they're in a really stressed state.
Yeah.
And that is not so the way the Enneagram works, you'll see on the diagram, every number has an arrow that's pointing to it and an arrow that's pointing away from it. So those are the stress lines. So
Yep.
there's one that you go to when you're in a place of security, and it's kind of your integration. So like for me as a 3, my integration point is the 6. So when I feel safe, I really become a member of my community. I'm able to vocalize what I'm afraid of, ask for what I need. Like those are kind of more of like a thriving state for me. Whereas
Yes.
when I'm in burned out, tapped out, too stressed, I go to a 9. I'm just like, forget it. I'm done, turning it off. Um,
Yep.
and
Same.
yeah, I remember having a roommate once and she was like, I have never seen anyone binge a TV show like you. Like she's like, I have no idea how you do it. I was like, I blacked out the whole show. I just needed to like sit in silence because my
Yep.
body's depleted, my adrenals are fatigued. And what's interesting is the more I've gotten into stress states, the more I realize that is a survival mechanism, that your body's going into what you need. So
Right. To keep you
while it's
safe,
not, yeah,
basically.
so while it's not necessarily healthy to binge watch 7 hours of Real Housewives, my body needs rest. And so
Right.
that's just kind of like a survival mechanism to when I start to see myself going there, like I'm shutting out the world, I'm withdrawing, I'm like going into like numbing state. It's a flash, like a yellow light, like, hey, girl, you need rest. Like,
Yep.
let's go to sleep. Let's take some melatonin. Like, let's take care of your body because like you're fatigued.
Yes.
And I think so a 7 goes to a 1 in stress a lot of
Hmm.
times, like that perfectionism. And sometimes that can show up as like really chaotic OCD tendencies. Like I have a friend who's a like classic 7. And when she's stressed, it's like, watch out, world, if there is a cup out of place, the world will fall apart. But I think what she really needs is a sense of order. Like her
Yeah.
mind is so scattered, life feels all over the place, chaotic, that if order can be created somewhere, it feels safe. And so really she's needing to quiet the mind, but it's coming out as like, if this dishwasher isn't perfectly organized, like I think I might lose my mind.
Right. Right.
So,
Well, and that's my husband too. He's a
yeah.
7. And
Uh-huh.
when, you know, most of the time he's
Yeah.
7 looking for adventure
Yeah.
and interesting things. But he's in the construction industry, in construction management. He's the superintendent
Uh-huh.
for a high-end remodeling company. And his job is to make is basically quality control.
Mm,
And so his job is to be a perfectionist. And
yeah.
so that is like he lives in that. It's almost like he
Yeah.
lives as a 1 at work, and then the rest, but his life, like his brain is actually a
Yeah.
7.
Yeah.
But to do well, it's like he kind of just
Yeah.
straddles that
Totally.
perfectionism space.
And that order can be so good for a 7. Like one of my clients who's a 7, she's a retired, she was a investment manager, like in finance, but you have to be like, there's no wiggle room when it comes to
Right.
that level of finance. And she thrived because she's quick, and like that order can really be such a good fit for a 7.
Yeah.
A lot of, I would say, imagine a ton of 7s are fantastic organizers because they can make it fun and be quick about it, but also
Right.
have this sense of quality. But what's so interesting is like when a 1 goes into stress, they go to 4. So a 1, it's like a true 1 is living with a lot of suppressed anger that they don't feel like they're allowed to express.
Okay.
So when they get really stressed, it's like this volcano, and then it erupts in venting out anger.
Okay.
So they go to basically a 4, which is the 4 is like the biggest emotional spectrum on the Enneagram that feels complete freedom of self-expression.
Yeah.
But what's so interesting is like it comes out as a temper and like moodiness and like almost like this, what we would think of as like overly emotional.
Yeah.
But what that 1 really needs when they see themselves starting to go down that path is just a healthy place to vent, like a
Yeah.
safe space to express anger and like full emotion. And then it keeps it from going really bad. So a lot of times I think that it's such a great those behaviors are such good warning signs, but then also knowing, seeing your client head towards that. Like for instance, say you have a client who is a 1 and is starting to like be really moody or get frustrated or lash out during the
Yeah.
process, saying something like, hey, I bet this is super frustrating. Like, let's just take a second and just talk about how frustrating it is if this doesn't work yet, and get
Yeah.
it out. And then we'll go from there.
That's great advice. Well, and that's something that I'd kind of forgotten. I mean, I remember we mentioned the book, The Road Back to You, and I'll put the title of that book in the show notes too. And I remember the diagram and it, the arrows of, when you're in stress, you go to this way. When you're kind of in a thriving state,
Yeah.
you're this way.
Yeah.
But I'd kind of forgotten that. But that is so helpful, especially as an organizer
Yeah.
in a service, in a way that you're in a service industry,
Yeah.
to be able to recognize the clues of when someone is really under stress, so that you can kind of walk them through that process and kind of
it's like
handhold.
like troubleshooting ways to like kind of alleviate the stressors and kind of diffuse the situation.
Right.
Because
Right.
getting into someone's personal life, I mean, our things, our home, our environment, it's so personal.
It's about as personal as you can get, other than like
Getting in someone's
actual
bank account and
therapy.
stuff. Yeah, totally, totally. I mean,
Right.
it can feel invasive, especially to someone who's already feeling really vulnerable or stressed out.
Yeah.
So I think learning the warning signs of each number is a great way to start to learn how to manage clients, but then also
Yes.
being aware of your own warning signs so you don't in turn trigger someone.
Yes. Yes. And there are pro organizers too that have business partners or team leads that
Mhm.
even just the interpersonal within your own
Yes.
team would be
Oh,
really
yeah.
helpful.
Totally. And I think there are some, like, people ask me all the time, they're like, who's the ideal business partner for me as a type, whatever, or who should I date or marry? Like, what's the right like combination?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that stuff's like popular more with like astrology.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the Enneagram, 2 healthy numbers will always be a good match, and 2 unhealthy numbers of any will always be a poor match.
Right.
So it really is just about the health of the human, but there are some complementary skill sets. Like I would say, especially in anything customer facing, a type 5 is really going to need to have to actively work on communication and like bringing the client into the process, because they are such solo workers.
Okay.
So if they were to partner with someone that's better at client facing, it would just make it less of a burden.
Yeah.
And if a type 2 were to partner, I mean, 2s and 8s work really well together. A 2 has a really hard time like maintaining personal boundaries. Like they're very like yes people. And so I think, but an 8 is so protective and so loyal. So a lot of times that could be a really good partnership, and that one's protecting the boundaries of the other, while the other's like softening. So that can be like very complementary. So even starting to kind of think through like where are my natural weaknesses, you can start to look for team members where that's their natural strength.
And then pairing people based on that, because a lot of times a team lead and like a junior organizer will go out, and then another team lead and another junior organizer. So pairing people up that are kind of complementary in that way.
Absolutely. And in that case, I would say like if the team lead is doing the pairing, then having some personality centric questions in an initial consultation would make that pairing so much easier.
Yeah. Something else that you mentioned, I think it was the 3 things that Enneagram helping you understand how you handle stress, your communication style, and then the ideal work environment. So something that probably, I think your environment probably is an outward display or expression of if you're in a stressed place or a thriving space. And so when clients are calling for an organizer, they're probably going to be in some sort of stress space, and therefore their environment is not ideal.
Yeah.
So this Enneagram assessment can also help with kind of helping understand what that person's ideal environment is and how to get them there.
Totally. And it can explain some clutter styles, but it can also just explain like from like more of a all-encompassing place, like what would just be like a good kind of direction to turn at least a conversation about like what does the space need to do for you, what does the system need to do for you.
Yes.
So like for a type 1, one thing that's kind of interesting about a type 1 is that they can get really frustrated when they're having to re-explain the rules all the time.
Okay.
So for say I would find it really interesting to organize for a type 1, because a type 1 is such a natural organizer. So for them to be calling an organizer, something is like very clearly off.
Yeah.
So I think that they would be like in a very stressed state. But I would, if they have family or anyone that they're sharing the space with, talking about like, okay, how are we going to communicate the system to everyone else that's going to use it, so that you're not the one that's always enforcing it? Because if you're always enforcing it, you're going to shut down, and like
that's
you're
exhausting.
Going to hate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not going to be enjoyable. But a 1 does thrive in a teaching environment. So sitting down and being like, okay, I want you to explain the system, how it works, why it works. And then let's have like another form of where they can go to remind themselves.
Yeah. So maybe really a binder helpful. Or something on the like kind of post, like something pretty posted on the wall.
Totally. And if you see things like really out of sorts for a 1, they're like in a very stressed state, they will go to a 7. So things can get really scattered and almost like manic in a way when their world feels like really chaotic. So paying attention to like, I would say with a 1, when clutter starts, it can progress really rapidly. Okay. So getting them back on track to like, okay, let's create order wherever we can and slowly get you back to a place, but also make it manageable. And then, so for a 1 also, there might be a level of trying to dig and see if any part of the clutter is a form of passive aggression towards being the only one maintaining it.
Ah,
So there might be some like inter-family dynamics going on there.
yeah, that's interesting.
For a type 2, I would say the main reason clutter starts for a 2 is that there's just not enough fuel in the tank.
Mhm.
They're driving kids to carpool, they're getting dinner on the table, they're balancing the checkbook, they're showing up for friends, they're PTA mom. They have too much on their plate.
Yep.
They're not taking care of themselves, and as an extension, they're not taking care of their environment.
Yep.
So I think it starts with being like, you matter, your space matters, and you cannot give from an empty cup. So let's first start with taking care of yourself. So I think starting, like if you're to reorganize a whole house for a 2, starting in their closet and their bathroom and then working out to the other family members would be such a transformative experience for a 2.
Yeah,
Because I think it's kind of saying like, let's take care of you first, and then we'll take care of the rest of the family.
that is so good. Yes.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense. And
Yeah.
as you speak through each of the different types,
Mhm.
I'm picturing someone that I know that is
Yeah.
that, and I'm like, yes, Abby would love that.
Yeah.
That would be transformative for her.
Totally, because it probably doesn't happen often. And
Right.
for a 2, all they want is to feel appreciated at the
Yes.
end of the day.
Yes.
For a type 3, I would say it's efficiency. Like
Yep.
if their life is getting chaotic and out of order, they just feel too busy. There's just there's too much on the plate, too much they're trying to do. And it's not from a 1 where it's like chaos out of order. It's almost like I just can't juggle this. And I would say for a 3 client, they want efficiency, like goals. Let's map it out. Let's make progress. I don't really want to do a deep dive into like my behavioral patterns yet. Let's just like make some mini progress. And then slowly I'll share how I think we might have gotten here as we go. Cause like trust really has to be built over time. So if you start the initial consult and like, what do you think you like happened to get to this place of clutter? They're either going to shut down or they're not going to tell you the full truth.
Right.
You're just not going to get the full picture.
And they're going to
want
to see, yeah. And
yeah,
in kind of that achieving, they want to see a transformation probably fairly quickly, because then it means that something is being accomplished.
Totally. Like starting by taking everything out of the pantry and the kitchen while you slowly resystematize is going to really stress a 3 out, I think.
Right.
You want like little,
start with the drawer.
Small wins. Yes, totally.
Yep.
And they can like see how it works, and then they'll trust the bigger, longer projects and have more patience for them.
Yes.
For a 4, it needs to feel inspiring.
Okay.
I think gathering like mood boards of like, here's what your space could look like if we had a system, having some visual components, asking like, how does this feel? Or does this feel like you? When you're suggesting a new system, be like, is there anything you would change? Is there anything you would like customize to kind of fit your personality or the way you want your day to flow? So even thinking back on some 4s, I know they really don't like being told that like, this is what you do and this is how to do it.
Right.
They want a little more autonomy. Yes.
Yes.
So it's saying something like, here's kind of a baseline system I would recommend. Let's customize it for what works best for you and a little more collaborative. So I think they would very much like to be part of the process. For a 5, they're going to want all the information. Aesthetics are not as important as it making sense. So like, it's cool that all of the spices are organized by size, but if they're not like alphabetical or like something else, it's lost. Sure. They're not looking for something just pretty. They're looking for something that like really makes sense logically. Like logic is super important. And
so
I would
5
say
may not want to decant every cracker, every type of pasta.
No. Yeah. Like, does this actually make sense? And back to the 4, a huge reason clutter starts for them is that it's so expressive. They start a project, they haven't finished it, it's all over the place. So it's kind of also creating spaces dedicated to different things that can kind of create atmospheres, like, you know, a space for meditation or journaling in the morning, or like a space for making coffee or something like that, kind of creating experiences within a home is really good for a 4. But yeah, to a 5, it's a logical system, and they're really going to want, like, they're going to be very into like the data of systematizing, like this makes sense because of this.
Yep.
Or like you will use your spice rack in this part because it makes sense for when you would be using it. They like very cause and effect order.
Yes. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. For a 6, I think that clutter starts a lot from just, it's very similar in a 2, that they're kind of caring for the needs of a family, caught up in their community or what's kind of going on in clutter builds. I would say I haven't noticed a lot of like clutter tendencies among 6s that I know. They seem to be pretty, I think there's part of that anxiety that's always constantly trying to create order.
Sure.
So I would say that if they're in a season where there's a lot of clutter, it's probably already a pretty stressful season for outside things. Maybe they've just had a baby, or they're going through a career transition and they just don't have like the energy and mental capacity. So I think in a lot of ways it's creating a system, and then it's talking about like, here are some ways to motivate yourself to keep it.
Okay.
So I would say really emphasize the benefits of having an orderly space. For a 7, it's hard because they're just so scattered. And that, like, if it's not fun, they don't want to do it. So unless they're in a stressed state, and then it goes to 1.
Right. Must be perfect.
Yeah. So I think for a 7, a lot of it is keep it aesthetic, like focus on like, we're going to organize this in a way that's like in your ideal color palette, or like looks beautiful. And it'll be so fun to entertain when all of your cocktail glasses are in the same china cabinet. Emphasize how much more fun life will be when things have a sense of order and structure to them. Like you actually have more options once all of your books are in one bookshelf, or like your kids, you're going to have more fun with your kids when you're not like chasing down every piece to a puzzle so that you can do it with them. So like kind of showing that like order actually creates possibility instead of it being limiting.
Love that.
And then for an 8, I think it's hard because when an 8's stressed, you're going to come into like probably like a very high assertive energy situation where they're probably going to be telling the organizer what to do. Where it's kind of like, hey, I want this organized and here's how I want it done. And this is exactly the way that you should do it. And I'll like watch and make sure you do it that way. So
and the organizer will have to push back and say, you have hired me because I have this skill set. Right.
But the best thing about an 8 is they bond through getting it right back.
Okay.
So for every 8 I know, they push, but they respect you when you push back.
Right.
So just don't be afraid to push back. Like if you get a client who's like high aggressive energy, I know what I want, I'm confident, like you came in here as a vendor, like, here's what I want you to do. And you push back and like, no, this is how we're going to do it. And here's why. You will have won them until the end of the project.
Yes, I agree 100%. And matching their level of intensity.
Yes.
So if that 8 is like up here at an intensity, you have to meet them there at that level of intensity. And then, they completely respect you.
Totally.
And you can move, you can keep moving.
In some ways, I wonder if it's a test sometimes, because I've had clients who are 8s and they come with a lot of demands. And then I will come back with a lot of demands. And there's like a clashing of the heads, but then they learn where those boundaries are. And from there on out, it's the best relationship ever. You just got to show them where the line is and they won't cross it.
I've had exact similar experiences.
So I think that's the biggest thing, is just learning how to push back with an 8, because it can be scary at first, but then the more you do it, the more you're like, oh, this is nothing. Pushing back with a 3, on the other hand, can sometimes get dicey.
Right.
But, a 9, the thing with a 9 is that they're low energy. So clutter is going to form because they just do not have the reserves to maintain order. Like they'll start off strong, but then they'll be tired, or something else will get in the way, or it's just too much to like remind the kids that they have chores. And so they'll do everything, but then they'll kind of lose, sight of that, and then they just kind of give up. And I think for a lot of nines, it's reminding them that they have an intuition and a voice that's worth exploring.
Yeah.
So saying like the fact that you want an ordered space is enough to create an ordered space.
Yes.
It's like, let's stop saying it doesn't matter, or I probably have better things to do with my time, or, stop apologizing and let's do it because it's something that you want.
Yeah.
And then really, again, same as it's just like kind of motivating them to keep it.
Yep.
Keep to the plan, reminding them of the benefits, why they started, why it's important to them, how they anticipate that it would change their lives,
Yeah.
and just kind of reminding of the why throughout the whole process.
And a 9 might be a good candidate for an ongoing maintenance package too.
Absolutely.
It might be
Yeah.
motivating for them to be like, oh, you'll come back every quarter and help me again for a few hours. And
yes,
that might seal the deal on the front end, knowing that they
100%.
have help going forward.
Yeah, I think nines get very overwhelmed by involved plans. And if they feel like they have support, they're going to be a lot more likely to get started in the first place.
Yeah. Well, this is so helpful. I think we've covered so many bases here on how to use the Enneagram and how the Enneagram can help you work with clients, find clients, even sell more to clients, especially with like that last piece that we just talked about, selling kind of the maintenance schedules.
Yeah.
What else do you think a pro organizer would need to know to best utilize the Enneagram?
I would say really the best place to start is personal growth. So getting familiar with the Enneagram as it pertains to yourself, noticing your own behaviors, and really learning as much as you can about your own type is going to give you a natural curiosity and sensitivity to the types of others. So I just would always recommend that someone start with their own personal growth and then probably start to integrate it into team members, kind of like your more traditional corporate team building, and just having conversations on like, how do you like to receive feedback? What do you do when you're angry? Like, what's the best way to bring something to your attention? And just asking those questions, and starting conversations like that is another like great way. And I think the Enneagram gives us insight into the types of questions we should be asking.
Yes. Well, and you mentioned as far as kind of figuring out your own Enneagram type, your assessment.
Yes.
Is it an assessment, an ebook?
It's an ebook. Okay. So it really goes through all the type, and then it gives you a lot of like further questions, journaling prompts, and even some of my favorite online tests if it's still not totally clear. It's super comprehensive. So if by the end of it, you will know your type. Awesome. But it's Enneagram for Entrepreneurs / find your type.
Awesome. So yes, enneagramforentrepreneurs.com/find your type. And then people can also find you at on Instagram at Enneagram for Entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And then also at Drop Cap Design, which is your design agency, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have to know, how did you get into this? As a designer, did you just get curious, or how did you get into
a little
this?
bit? It was like 5 years ago. I just was in such complete burnout with work. And I had a couple of friends mention the Enneagram, but I thought like, I don't want to do another Myers-Briggs. Like, these things are interesting for a little bit of time, but I need like deep help.
Yeah.
But I was gifted the Road Back to You actually, and I started reading it. And I was like, wow, this is completely different from anything else I've come in contact with. And so I kind of took a month off from working with clients. I was just like at my wit's end, and I read probably 10 Enneagram books. I mean, I read the Richard Rohr, I read all like the Wisdom of the Enneagram, everything I could get my hands on. I was like so in the weeds, loved it. And then I started writing stories as my way of trying to process the information. So because my brain kind of works that way, I was like, I won't understand a type 5 until I create a type 5 character and try to think like, how would this actually play out? So that's why the blog started, was
Interesting.
like short stories around each type. So I
Okay.
could kind of be like, oh, this is how that would play out. And then I ended up like getting certified in San Francisco and just like going down the whole path. But
Wow.
I love it. I think it's amazing. Every time that I kind of take a step back and I'm like, you get burned out with anything if you are in
Sure.
it for too long.
Yeah,
And I step back and I'm like, oh yeah, this is still just as powerful as it was when I first started. And just there's a lot of goodness there.
definitely. Well, that is amazing. And I am glad that that I found you and that you were
Me
able to
too.
share all this great information with us
Uh,
today. I
well,
think
thank you
you've
so much for having me. I've
yeah,
enjoyed this.
absolutely. You've given me
Yeah.
a lot to think about, and I think our professional organizers lots to think about and then implement
Mm.
in their own services.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Kadie.